My name is Sanjay Sisodiya. I'm a neurologist. I see adults with neurological conditions at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and the Epilepsy Society in the United Kingdom. My involvement with alternating hemiplegia started when I saw my first person with this condition a few years ago. And since then I've been involved in the gene discovery, and I'm also patron of the Alternating Hemiplegia of Childhood Society in the UK. And with these developments I have seen now quite a number of adults with alternating hemiplegia. I call it alternating hemiplegia because the people I see are no longer children. And I am involved in their care and also in organising research projects to which they've contributed. So I would say that it is a rare and unusual condition. It's different to many other conditions that I see in its range of diversity and complexity. It's a genetic condition, but not usually an inherited condition. In most cases, it arises because of a new mutation in the person who has the condition. It usually starts in childhood with a range of symptoms, often with funny eye movements and then weakness or paralysis down one side of the body, aspects which may get much better with sleep. It's often misdiagnosed in the early stages. It may be mistaken for a type of epilepsy, and there are times when parents take their children to hospital and the child's completely well by the time they get there. So it may take some time before the diagnosis is made. And the fact that it is a rare condition and many physicians have not heard about it often contributes to delays in diagnosis. But as information about it becomes more widespread because of the genetic discovery and the research that's going on, I think that will change and more people will come to know of it, especially amongst the important communities like the paediatric neurologists and adult neurologists. I don't see children with the condition, but I do see adults with the condition, and by the time I see adults, often they have had the diagnosis made and various treatments have been tried. And the problems I see in people who have this condition are obviously the continuing hemiplegic episodes, which may become less of a problem for some people as they get older. Epileptic seizures also occur, various movement disorders, and one of the complexities that we see is that sometimes it's difficult to separate the two. Difficult to separate the movement disorders from the epileptic seizures, difficult to know what a particular event might be. And I'm not sure that we yet have the language to describe some of the features that we see, actually, that may be very unique to alternating hemiplegia. People may have other problems, other medical problems, and these include, for example, pain, with a number of the different types of attack that people with the condition suffer. We're also finding, I think as time goes on, other things that can also occur, and one wonders whether they are linked to the condition or maybe occur for some other reason in an individual with the condition. But the genetic discoveries, I think, are helping us understand this better, because we are able to better understand which organs might be involved in the condition. For example, we have been looking at the potential involvement of the heart in alternating hemiplegia. It's known, for example, that there is some increase in the risk of sudden death associated with this condition. The basis for this is not well understood. It may in some cases be related to epileptic seizures. We know that can happen in epilepsy, but that doesn't seem to be the explanation in all the cases that have been reported. And there is some evidence that there may be cardiac involvement that may contribute, and we know this happens in other conditions like difficult to treat epilepsy. So we've been doing a study in which we've been looking at the ECG, the heart tracing, in people who have alternating hemiplegia. Just an ordinary ECG recording that takes a few seconds, but also some more prolonged recordings that we've obtained in the course of other tests. And we've seen that in about half of the patients who we've studied, there are ECG abnormalities. These abnormalities seem to become more common as people get older. The range of abnormalities is wide, and the abnormalities may be seen in one record and not another record, so they seem to be dynamic, which means that if you don't see it in one record, it doesn't mean it's not there. You might need to do some more records to capture the abnormalities. And the abnormalities overall seem to fall broadly into a type of change in the heart called an abnormality of the repolarization reserve. And there are various implications for these findings, and we will certainly need to take them further. This is just the start of work in this area. And we know that ATP1A3 is expressed in the heart. So that's one of the studies that I've been involved in. And there are other studies we're doing, such as looking at brain excitability in alternating hemiplegia. We know that clearly there is brain dysfunction and that it tends to be periodic, episodic, and we are looking at how brain excitability might change over time and seeing some interesting dynamics which are quite unexpected and not reported in other conditions. And I think this reflects the fact that alternating hemiplegia is a unique disorder in which complex things happen that we are only just beginning to understand. I think that would make a difference because we would get a better definition of what the abnormalities in alternating hemiplegia actually are. So we have a snapshot, and what we want to do is to have prolonged recordings that tell us what behavior of the heart is like over a period of time. And we know already that the changes in the ECGs we see are not related to seizures, they're not related to anti-epileptic medication, they're not related to the hemiplegic episodes. So what we need is really a better definition of when these things are happening, how common they are, what kind of abnormalities we're seeing. I think it would help with management overall. I'm not sure it would directly help with a new drug. I think it's mechanistic studies that will do that. But it is looking at the whole picture. And if, for example, sudden death in alternating hemiplegia might be related to heart abnormalities, then to know that is important because these are things that can be prevented. So sudden death due to a cardiac abnormality can be prevented, for example, by implantation of an appropriate pacemaker, if that's the right way to go. And whatever treatments may arise, it is still likely, in my view, that they won't completely cure the condition. They may treat many aspects of it, and of course we all hope that that will happen. But if that doesn't happen, we need to think about managing other aspects of the condition, such as potential cardiac arrhythmia. So treatment in adults with alternating hemiplegia is difficult, I think it's fair to say, mainly because there is not a large body of evidence to which we can refer and say, this is the best treatment for the seizures, this is the best treatment for the hemiplegic episodes. That information is not out there. And we have to work on general principles. So we know, for example, for epileptic seizures of different sorts in different individuals, certain drugs seem to work. We know that certain anti-epileptic drugs have additional properties that might make them good candidates for use in people with alternating hemiplegia. So, for example, we know some drugs might have a beneficial effect in other paroxysmal disorders like migraine. And if an anti-epileptic drug can cover those aspects, as well as covering perhaps pain that might arise from neurological sources, then maybe those are good drugs to be thinking about. But unfortunately, there isn't a huge background against which we can base treatment for each individual. And I think especially as recognition of alternating hemiplegia in adults is only now really beginning to take place, there are probably people out there with the condition in adulthood who have not yet been diagnosed. So treatment in adults, I think, is quite a challenge. I'm still finding out. I think research must take place along a number of different lines in parallel. So there's obviously got to be the scientific research in the laboratory, trying to understand what the mutations do, in models to try and see what happens in a whole organism. The research studies that we're doing, for example, with transcranial magnetic stimulation. But I think the other side of this is that Families can do a lot by gathering information, by finding out what they see, and their experience is so much greater than ours, to see what happens with certain circumstances that make episodes worse, things that might make episodes less bad, drugs that seem to work. Anecdotes, for example, if someone is treated with another drug for a different condition that turns out at the same time to have some major effect on the hemiplegic episodes, that can be really useful information. It's chance, but it can sometimes provide important information. So gathering that information together, and the families can do that, would be a really useful thing. Well, I hope so. I don't know. I think that's unpredictable. I think we know so little even now about the mechanisms that it's really impossible to predict, in my view, what the right way would be to deal with the underlying pathophysiology. So, of course, we all hope so, but I think it's really difficult to know if that's going to happen. I think one promising aspect of this is that the defective protein is membrane-bound, which makes it potentially more accessible than something that's deep within the cell. So I think there's certainly hope, but who knows? Everyone I've seen has had the condition, almost everyone I've seen has had the condition diagnosed in childhood, and then they've come to me as adults, and they've all been on Flunarizine, and I've maintained that treatment. I haven't, actually. All the people I've seen have come to me with a diagnosis already. I've excluded the diagnosis where it was proposed as a diagnosis, but on clinical grounds I didn't think it was appropriate, and our various investigations, including genetic tests, didn't support that diagnosis. And in fact, the individual turned out to have a completely different condition. But I've not diagnosed it afresh in an adult. What we have seen is that there are related phenotypes in which we thought that mutation in ATP1A3 might be a cause, and we have found that. So we have diagnosed a family with no previous diagnosis, with a complex phenotype, who turned out to have an ATP1A3 mutation. I think it's impressive how the families with AHC have come together in the meetings I've been to, and really, I think, pushed the agenda forward. That's a very important thing, because for such a rare condition, I think the voice has to come not only from the medical side, but also from the families. And that, in my view, does make a difference. And actually, I've been really impressed at how families and basic scientists and clinicians have worked together in ATP1A3 related disease. And I would encourage people to continue to do that, because I think it does help the field move forward in all aspects. You know, we have to think about all of these rare conditions as not just the medical aspects, not just the seizures, not just the hemiplegic episodes, but how they affect the person overall and how they affect families overall. And it's only when we begin to do that, I think, that we can really provide proper care, and we can only do that together. I think there are a number of potential options here. We know that the ketogenic diet can be effective in some people with difficult to treat epilepsy who don't have GLUT1 deficiency syndrome. So in GLUT1 deficiency syndrome, it works. We know that. Energy depletion is an interesting area in paroxysmal neurological disorders. We know that in some people who have difficult to treat epilepsy, the ketogenic diet can be an effective treatment, even if the cause of the epilepsy is not GLUT1 deficiency, which is the classical cause of response to the ketogenic diet. So that's certainly something that I think needs to be considered in management of alternating hemiplegia. There are also more experimental treatments that are being considered to try to boost energy provision within the brain, and also, for example, to promote mitochondrial biogenesis within the brain. And I think it'll be interesting to see what these new studies show, whether they might improve overall control or whether they might be relevant more acutely. I think that's yet to be seen. It's a very good question. I think if alternating hemiplegia is going to be sorted out, that's going to be a multidisciplinary effort. I don't think that the solution is going to come from any one source. And I suppose that the best way to use unrestricted, unlimited funds would be to gather together everyone who's interested in alternating hemiplegia and address all the different aspects that are important and think of a coherent strategy for understanding the disease and treating it. I don't think it's going to come from investing all the money in one particular aspect and hoping that that will solve the disease. I don't think that's going to happen. It's such a complicated condition. Once it's established, because of course you can't make the diagnosis until it manifests, once it's established, I think many things have already happened and gone on. And I doubt that that's going to be reversible with one simple step. So I would actually, I think, try and get an organised, international, multidisciplinary, multi-centre strategy to solve alternating hemiplegia.